It was August 14th, 1979, and three men stood in a gravel parking lot outside a New Holland dealership in Marshalltown, Iowa, looking at a machine none of them could afford alone. The forage harvester sat on the showroom floor like a promise, self-propelled, 12-foot head, the kind of machine that could cut and chop silage fast enough to beat weather, fast enough to expand a dairy operation, fast enough to make three small farms feel like they had a future. Raymond Kohler was 41. He ran 200 acres and 60 head of dairy cattle on land his father had paid off in 1952. He was methodical, quiet, the kind of man who wrote equipment expenses in a pocket notebook and kept every receipt in a shoebox under his workbench. Beside him stood Dennis Farwell, 38, louder, quicker to laugh. His farm was slightly larger, 240 acres, but he carried more debt. His father had expanded in the 1960s and died before the loans were cleared. Dennis had been paying down that debt for 12 years. The third man was Lloyd Voss, 46 years old, no children. His wife taught school in town. Lloyd's farm was the smallest of the three, 160 acres, but he ran it tighter than anyone in the county. He didn't owe a dollar to anyone, and he intended to keep it that way. They had known each other since childhood. Their farms bordered each other in a triangle of sections south of town. They attended the same church. Their wives played cards on Friday nights. Raymond's oldest daughter babysat for Dennis's kids. Lloyd had helped both men pull calves, fix equipment, and stack hay during bad years. The idea to buy the forage harvester together came from Dennis. It made sense on paper. None of them could justify the cost alone, but together, the math worked. They could split the purchase price three ways, rotate usage based on a schedule, and share maintenance costs equally. The dealer had the paperwork ready, a 5-year loan, equal signatures, equal responsibility. Raymond studied the contract for a long time before signing. Dennis signed quickly, grinning, already talking about how much faster they'd get first cutting done. Lloyd was the last to sign. He held the pen for a moment, looked at both men, and said, "We do this, we do it right. No shortcuts, no excuses." They all nodded. They all meant it. The dealer took a Polaroid of the three of them standing in front of the machine, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning like they'd just won something. If you've come this far, you're the kind of person who understands that some stories take time to unfold. These are stories about farming, about equipment, about decisions that don't show their cost for years. If that speaks to you, consider subscribing. There are more stories like this one. Stories about what gets built, what gets broken, and what gets carried forward. The first summer went smoothly. They established a rotation. Raymond took the harvester first, then Dennis, then Lloyd. Each man was responsible for fueling and greasing after his turn. They split the cost of a small shed built on the corner of Raymond's property, where the machine would be stored. In 1980, they cut silage in near-perfect conditions. The weather held. The machine ran clean. Raymond noted every hour of operation in his notebook. Dennis showed up early on Lloyd's cutting days to help, just because. Lloyd kept spare parts in his truck and replaced a worn belt on Raymond's time without being asked. At church, their wives joked about how well the partnership was working. Other farmers asked questions. A few seemed interested in trying something similar. The New Holland harvester did exactly what it was supposed to do. It cut alfalfa and corn silage cleanly. The chop length was consistent. The engine ran smooth. The hydraulics responded without hesitation. It was a good machine, solid, reliable in the way that New Holland equipment had always been reliable. But small fractures always begin before anyone notices them. In the spring of 1981, Raymond asked to use the harvester 2 days earlier than the rotation allowed. His silage was ready and rain was coming. Dennis agreed immediately. Lloyd hesitated but said yes, as long as Raymond gave those 2 days back at the end of the season. Raymond agreed. He cut his silage. The rain came. Dennis and Lloyd cut theirs a week later in muddier conditions. At the end of the season, when Raymond's scheduled turn came around again, he used the harvester as planned. He didn't give the 2 days back. He had forgotten, or he felt he'd earned them, or he assumed it didn't matter. Lloyd didn't say anything, but he remembered. He wrote it down in a small notebook he kept in his truck. Raymond, 2 days, spring '81. He didn't show it to anyone. but he kept it. By 1982, the maintenance arguments began. The harvester needed a new head. The dealer quoted $1,800 for parts and labor. They met at Raymond's kitchen table to discuss it. Dennis wanted to go ahead with the repair immediately. His dairy herd had grown, and he needed the machine ready for spring. Raymond agreed, but wanted to get a second opinion from an independent mechanic to see if they could save money. Lloyd wanted to wait until winter, when the dealer might offer a discount, and he wanted all three of them present when the work was done so they could verify the charges. They argued for 2 hours. Coffee went cold. Raymond's wife stayed in the living room, pretending not to listen. In the end, they went with Raymond's suggestion. The independent mechanic did the work for $1,400. It took 3 weeks longer than the dealer promised. Dennis missed his optimal cutting window. His first cutting yield was down 15%. He didn't say much about it, but his tone changed. When they split the cost, Dennis paid his share without comment, but he stopped showing up early to help. He stopped offering spare parts. The casual friendship that had made the first 2 years easy began to thin. The summer of 1983 was dry, brutal dry. Silage quality was poor across the county. Everyone was cutting early, trying to salvage what they could. The harvester ran hard. Long days. Dust in every bearing. On the second day of Dennis's turn, the machine threw a drive belt. Dennis called Raymond and Lloyd. They came out to the field. Lloyd brought his toolbox. They replaced the belt together, standing in the heat, covered in chaff and grease. "It's running hot," Lloyd said, checking the temperature gauge. "Needs a coolant flush." "It's fine," Dennis said. "I'll finish this field and we'll do it tonight." "Should do it now," Lloyd said. "I said I'll do it tonight." Raymond stayed quiet. He didn't want to choose sides. He walked back to his truck and pretended to look for something in the bed. Dennis finished the field. By the time he brought the harvester back to the shed that evening, the engine was overheating badly. Lloyd was waiting. He walked around the machine, checked the temperature gauge, and shook his head. "You ran it too hard." "It's fine." "You're going to blow the head gasket if you keep." "I said it's fine, Lloyd." Lloyd walked back to his truck without another word. He wrote in his notebook, "Overheated, Aug. 83, Dennis." 3 days later, the head gasket blew. The repair cost $900. They split it 3 ways, as agreed. But Dennis felt Lloyd had been waiting for it to happen just to prove a point. Lloyd felt Dennis had ignored his advice and cost them all money. Raymond felt caught in the middle and wished he'd said something in the field. None of them said any of this out loud. The machine was repaired. It ran fine, but the silence between the 3 men grew heavier. In 1984, the payment schedule became an issue. The loan required monthly payments, but they had agreed to settle up quarterly, with each man responsible for his share. It was easier that way, less paperwork. They trusted each other. In April, Dennis was short. Corn prices had dropped, and his cash flow was tight. He told Raymond he'd be late on his third of the payment, maybe 2 weeks, maybe a month. Raymond covered Dennis's share so the loan wouldn't be late. He didn't ask Dennis to sign anything. They were friends. It would be handled. Lloyd found out in June when Raymond mentioned it casually after church. Lloyd's face went still. "You covered his payment?" "Just temporary. Without asking me, he'll pay it back." "That's not the point." "Then what is the point, Lloyd?" "The point is we're partners. You don't make financial decisions without talking to me first." "It was $200. "It's the principle." Lloyd walked away. His wife had to call him back to the car twice. She asked what was wrong. He said nothing. But that night he sat at the kitchen table and went through all the receipts, all the payments, all the hours logged. He was looking for something. Some proof that he wasn't imagining the imbalance. Dennis paid Raymond back in August. But Lloyd never forgot that Raymond had made a financial decision for the partnership without consulting him. And Raymond never forgot that Lloyd had made him feel foolish for helping a friend. By the spring of 1985, they were barely speaking outside of necessary coordination. The rotation continued. The machine still worked. The New Holland harvester was doing exactly what it had been built to do. It started every time. It cut clean. It didn't leak oil or hydraulic fluid. It was a better partner than any of the 3 men had become to each other. But the small courtesies had stopped. No one showed up early to help anymore. No one offered spare parts. When the harvester needed an oil change, they argued about what grade to use and whose responsibility it was to buy it. Dennis wanted to use synthetic oil. It cost more, but it was better for the engine. Lloyd said conventional oil was fine and had always been fine. Raymond said he didn't care as long as someone made a decision. They stood in the shed, the three of them, arguing about oil for 20 minutes. The harvester sat between them, silent, waiting. In the end, they used conventional oil. Dennis paid for it himself rather than continue the argument. He made sure Lloyd saw him write the receipt and put it in his pocket. He didn't file it with the partnership records. He kept it separate, just in case. In July of 1985, Lloyd used the machine on a Sunday. It was his scheduled turn, and his silage was ready. The weather forecast showed rain coming Monday night. If he waited, he'd lose half the field. So he cut on Sunday. Dennis and Raymond both attended the same church as Lloyd's wife, and they both believed farm work on Sunday should be emergency only. Lloyd didn't attend that church. He'd been raised Lutheran but hadn't gone to services in years. His wife went alone. Dennis saw the harvester running as he drove past Lloyd's farm on the way home from church. He mentioned it to Raymond in the parking lot the following Sunday. Saw Lloyd cutting on the Sabbath. Raymond nodded. I heard. They didn't say more, but it sat between them, another small fracture, another piece of evidence that Lloyd didn't respect the same things they did. At the next partnership meeting, Dennis brought it up. You cut on Sunday. I cut when the weather required it, Lloyd said. It wasn't an emergency. Rain was coming. Rain comes every summer. That doesn't make it an emergency. Are we really doing this? Lloyd said. Are we really arguing about what day I cut my own silage? It reflects on all of us, Dennis said. Lloyd stood up from the table. Then maybe we shouldn't be partners anymore. He walked out. The meeting ended. Raymond sat alone in his kitchen, staring at the notebook where he kept partnership records, and wondered how three reasonable men had ended up here. The machine itself was still running well. That was the strange part. The New Holland forage harvester did exactly what it was supposed to do. It cut silage cleanly. It chopped evenly. It rarely broke down, and when it did, the problems were minor. A belt, a bearing, a hydraulic line. Nothing the machine did wrong. Just the normal wear of a tool being used the way it was designed to be used. The problem was never the machine. The problem was that three men who had once trusted each other now kept separate notebooks tracking hours, fuel costs, and perceived slights. The problem was that shared ownership required ongoing communication, compromise, and grace, and all three had run out. In October of 1985, Raymond proposed selling the harvester and splitting the proceeds. They met at the dealership. The manager gave them a trade-in value. It was lower than any of them expected. Machines depreciate. They all knew that, but seeing the number written down felt like losing money they'd already spent. Dennis didn't want to sell. He'd expanded his dairy herd based on having access to the harvester. Selling meant going back to hiring custom cutters, which would cost more in the long run. Lloyd wanted to sell. He was tired of the arguments, tired of the partnership, tired of feeling like he was the only one who took the agreement seriously. Raymond was somewhere in the middle. He just wanted it to be over, but he also didn't want to take a loss. His daughter was starting college in 2 years. He needed every dollar. They couldn't agree, so they didn't sell. The harvester went back into the shed. The three men went back to their farms. The loan payments continued. The winter of 1985 was the worst in 12 years. Snow came in November and didn't stop. Temperatures stayed below zero for weeks. Diesel gelid, pipes froze, cattle needed more feed, more bedding, more care. Raymond spent every morning breaking ice in water tanks. His hands cracked and bled. His youngest son helped when he wasn't in school, but the boy was only 12 and the work was hard. Dennis's operation was larger and the cold hit him harder. He was feeding out hay faster than he'd planned. By January, he was buying hay from a dealer in the next county at twice the price he should have paid. And then on January 18th, 1986, Dennis's barn roof collapsed. The snow had been building for weeks. Dennis had known it was a risk, but he didn't have time to clear it. He was alone that morning, feeding cattle, when he heard the crack. He ran. The roof came down behind him. Beams, metal roofing, insulation, and snow, all of it fell into the barn where 18 head of cattle were standing. 6 died instantly. 12 more were injured. Dennis pulled them out one by one, dragging them through the snow, some of them screaming, some of them silent. By the time he got the last one out, his hands were numb and his face was wet with tears he didn't remember crying. He called Raymond at 6 in the morning. His voice was shaking so badly Raymond could barely understand him. Raymond drove over immediately. He brought his tractor, his oldest son, and a thermos of coffee. They worked in the cold for 10 hours, pulling beams, clearing debris, covering what could be saved with tarps. Raymond's son asked why Mr. Voss wasn't there. Raymond didn't answer. Lloyd didn't come. He called that evening and said he'd heard what happened and was sorry. He offered to lend Dennis some hay if he needed it. Dennis said no. Lloyd didn't offer to help clear the barn. He didn't drive over. He didn't show up. Dennis never forgave that. He sat at his kitchen table that night, his hands bandaged, his wife silent across from him, and he thought about Lloyd sitting warm in his house, offering hay like it was enough. It wasn't enough. By the spring of 1986, the partnership was poisoned beyond repair. Dennis wanted to buy out Raymond and Lloyd's shares and take full ownership of the harvester. He needed it. His operation depended on it. He offered to pay them each what the dealer had quoted as their third of the trade-in value. Lloyd refused. If Dennis wanted full ownership, Lloyd said he should pay them each a third of the original purchase price, not the depreciated value. That's not fair, Dennis said. Neither is doing all the maintenance while you run it into the ground, Lloyd said. I've maintained that machine better than either of you. You blew the head gasket. That was 3 years ago, and I'm still paying for it. Raymond tried to mediate. He suggested they get an independent appraisal and use that number. Both men refused. Dennis said the appraiser would side with Lloyd. Lloyd said the appraiser would side with Dennis. Raymond said they were both being unreasonable. The argument happened in the parking lot after church. People watched from their cars. Raymond's wife cried in the passenger seat. Dennis's son, 14 years old, sat in the back and asked his father why Mr. Voss was so angry. Dennis couldn't explain it. Not in a way that made sense. Not in a way that didn't make all three of them sound petty and small. In June of 1986, Lloyd stopped making his loan payments. He didn't tell Raymond or Dennis. He just stopped. The bank sent notices to all three of them, since all three had signed. Raymond called Lloyd twice. Lloyd didn't call back. Dennis and Raymond covered Lloyd's share to keep the loan current. They had no choice. Their credit was on the line, too. When Raymond finally drove to Lloyd's farm to confront him, Lloyd was standing in his machine shed, organizing tools. He moved slowly, deliberately, like a man who had made a decision and was now living with it. You stopped paying. Raymond said. I'm out, Lloyd said. I want out of the partnership. You can't just stop paying. Watch me. We're covering your share. You're making us pay for your... Then sell the machine. Dennis won't sell. That's not my problem anymore. Raymond stood there in the doorway, looking at a man he'd known for 30 years, a man whose father had helped Raymond's father build a corn crib in 1954, a man who had stood as a groomsman at Raymond's wedding, and he realized he didn't recognize him anymore. What happened to you? Raymond said quietly. Lloyd didn't answer. He went back to organizing his tools. Raymond left. The lawsuit started in August. Dennis and Raymond filed jointly against Lloyd for breach of contract and unpaid loan obligations. Lloyd countersued, claiming Dennis had damaged the machine through negligence and Raymond had mismanaged the partnership finances by covering Dennis's missed payment without authorization. The case dragged through county court for 9 months. The depositions were brutal. Receipts were examined. Maintenance logs were questioned. Every small disagreement from the past 7 years was documented and presented as evidence of bad faith. Raymond was asked why he had covered Dennis's payment in 1984. He explained that Dennis was a friend and had been short on cash temporarily. The lawyer asked if friend meant Raymond prioritized Dennis over Lloyd. Raymond said no. The lawyer asked him to explain the difference. Raymond couldn't. Dennis was asked about the head gasket. He explained that the machine had been overheating and he'd intended to flush the coolant that evening. The lawyer asked why he hadn't done it immediately when Lloyd suggested it. Dennis said he was trying to finish the field before rain came. The lawyer asked if saving time was more important than preventing a $900 repair. Dennis didn't answer. Lloyd was asked why he'd stopped paying. He said the partnership had become untenable and he wanted out. The lawyer asked why he hadn't requested a buyout through proper channels. Lloyd said he'd tried and been refused. The lawyer asked for documentation of that request. Lloyd didn't have any. Their wives stopped speaking. Their children avoided each other at school. At church, people chose sides without meaning to, just by where they sat and who they spoke to after services. The pastor tried to mediate. He invited all three men to meet with him privately. Only Raymond came. The pastor asked if reconciliation was possible. Raymond said he didn't know. He didn't think so, but he said he'd pray about it. He did pray. It didn't help. In April of 1987, the judge ruled in favor of Dennis and Raymond. Lloyd was ordered to pay his share of the remaining loan balance plus legal fees. The total came to $4,000. Lloyd didn't have it. His savings were gone. He'd spent them on the lawsuit. His farm was small and produced just enough income to cover expenses. He had no credit, no family to borrow from. In June, Lloyd sold 60 acres of his farm to cover the judgment. It was land his grandfather had bought in 1921. Original homestead land. The first 60 acres the family had ever owned. Lloyd had grown up playing in the creek that ran through the southwest corner. His father had built a small stone marker there with the year carved into it, 1921. He sold it to a farmer from the next county who he'd never met. The man paid cash. Lloyd signed the deed in a lawyer's office in town. He didn't go back to look at the land before it transferred. He couldn't. His wife cried when he told her. Not because of the money, because of what it meant. Lloyd's wife stopped teaching that year. The school didn't renew her contract. They said it was budget cuts, but everyone knew it was because of the lawsuit. Small towns have long memories. They moved to a smaller house in town. Lloyd took a job at a feed mill, mixing rations, loading trucks. He worked there for 22 years. He never farmed again. Dennis bought out Raymond's share of the harvester in 1988. Raymond was tired. His youngest daughter was starting college, and he needed the cash. He took Dennis's offer, slightly less than fair market value, but enough to be done with it. They signed the papers at the bank. They didn't speak beyond what was necessary. Raymond walked out with a check. Dennis walked out with full ownership of a machine he'd wanted to own alone for 3 years. He drove it home and parked it in the shed. He stood there for a long time, looking at it, and realized he didn't feel the relief he'd expected. Dennis ran the harvester for another 12 years. It held up. New Holland built machines to last, and this one did. He maintained it carefully, kept it sheltered, replaced parts before they failed. The engine was rebuilt once in 1995. The head was replaced in 1998. But the frame, the chassis, the essential structure of the machine, it was still original, still solid. But his operation never grew the way he'd planned. The debt from the lawsuit, the cost of buying out Raymond, the years of stress, it all added up. His herd stayed the same size. His margins got thinner. His son went to college and didn't come back. His daughter married a man from Illinois and moved away. In 2003, Dennis's wife was diagnosed with cancer, ovarian. Stage 3. She fought for 2 years. The medical bills consumed their savings, then their credit, then their hope. She died in the spring of 2005. Dennis was 73 years old, farming alone, and tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. He sold the farm in 2006. The forage harvester went to auction. A young farmer from Missouri bought it for $6,000. It was still running. Raymond kept farming until 2001. He sold out to a corporate dairy operation that was buying up land throughout the county. They paid fair market value. Raymond and his wife moved to town. They bought a small house near their daughter. Raymond worked part-time at the hardware store because he didn't know what to do with his hands when they were idle. He helped customers find parts, explained how to fix things, gave advice that was usually good. He saw Dennis at the grocery store occasionally. They nodded to each other. They didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. The friendship had ended years ago, and neither of them had the energy to resurrect it. Raymond died in 2015, heart failure. He was 87. His funeral was well attended. Dennis didn't come. Lloyd worked at the feed mill until 2008. He was 75. His back was ruined from years of lifting 50-pound bags. His hands were arthritic. He walked with a limp from a knee that had been broken when he was young and never set properly. He and his wife lived quietly. They had enough, just enough. Social Security and a small pension from the mill. They didn't travel. They didn't go out much. They watched television in the evenings and went to bed early. They didn't talk about the farm. When people in town asked what had happened, Lloyd would say he'd gotten out of farming at the right time. He didn't say it cost him 60 acres, a lifetime of work, and 3 friendships that had once felt permanent. His wife never mentioned the partnership. She never mentioned Raymond or Dennis. She never mentioned the lawsuit. But sometimes, late at night, Lloyd would wake up and find her sitting at the kitchen table, looking at nothing, and he knew she was thinking about it. About what they'd lost. About what they'd paid for getting out. In June of 2018, Lloyd Voss died of a heart attack. He was 85. The funeral was held at the Lutheran church he'd stopped attending 40 years earlier. His wife had arranged it. There was a small gathering, maybe 30 people, old co-workers from the mill, a few neighbors, his wife's sister. Raymond Kohler came. He was 90 now, moving slowly, his wife gone 3 years. He sat in the back. He didn't speak to anyone. He stayed for the service and left before the reception. Dennis Farwell came too. He was 87. His hands shook from Parkinson's. His son had driven him from 2 counties away. Dennis sat on the opposite side of the church from Raymond. He didn't look across the aisle. The pastor spoke about forgiveness and grace, about letting go of old hurts, about the mercy that comes when we release what we've held too long. Neither Raymond nor Dennis took communion. After the service, outside in the parking lot, Dennis's son helped him to the car. Raymond was already sitting in his daughter's passenger seat, the door open, his feet still on the pavement. For a moment, the 2 men looked at each other across 40 feet of gravel. Neither waved, neither nodded, neither said a word. Raymond's daughter closed his door. Dennis's son started the engine. They drove away in opposite directions. The New Holland forage harvester, the one they had bought together in 1979, the one they had fought over, the one that had divided them. It was still running. The farmer in Missouri had sold it to a custom operator in 2011. That operator sold it to a young couple starting a grass-fed dairy in 2016. They rebuilt the engine, replaced the head, upgraded the hydraulics, they painted it, they maintained it. In the summer of 2019, it was cutting silage in Nebraska. 40 years old, still chopping clean, still doing the work it was built to do. The machine had outlasted the partnership by 33 years. It had outlasted 2 of the men who bought it. It would outlast the 3rd. There is a photograph that still exists, though no one looks at it anymore. It was taken in August of 1979, the day they bought the harvester. The dealer had a Polaroid camera and offered to take their picture. The 3 men stood in front of the machine, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning like they just won something. Raymond kept that photo in his wallet until 1987. After the lawsuit, he took it out one night, looked at it for a long time, and threw it in the trash. His wife found it the next morning and asked if he was sure. He said yes. Dennis kept his copy in a drawer in the kitchen. It stayed there for years, buried under other papers, warranties, old Christmas cards. His wife found it after he sold the farm and asked if he wanted to take it with them. He looked at it, looked at the 3 faces smiling back at him, and said no. She threw it away. Lloyd's copy was in a box in his basement when he died. His wife found it while cleaning out the house. She didn't recognize the men in the photo at first. It had been taken so long ago, they all looked like strangers. Young, hopeful, unaware of what was coming. She held it for a moment, then put it back in the box. A week later, she threw the whole box away. This is what happens when 3 men decide to share something that should have brought them together. This is what happens when small disagreements are left unspoken until they harden into resentment. This is what happens when pride, stubbornness, and memory replaced communication, compromise, and grace. The New Holland forage harvester didn't destroy 3 families. The men did that themselves, but the machine made it possible. It gave them something to fight over, something to measure, something to win or lose, something to blame when the real problem was that none of them knew how to say what they meant or hear what the others were trying to say. And in the end, the only thing that won was the machine itself. Still running, still working, still doing exactly what it was built to do, long after the men who bought it had forgotten why they wanted it in the first place, long after their wives had stopped speaking, long after their children had moved away, long after the friendship had turned to silence, the silence had turned to lawsuits, and the lawsuits had turned to separate parking lots at a funeral where 2 old men couldn't even look at each other. The machine didn't care about any of that. It just kept running.